Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are breaking down the Detroit Lions 2024 offseason recap. We're going to go over all the departures, acquisitions, review their draft picks, and at the very end of the video, we're going to break down their schedule and how we think the Lions are going to do by providing our record prediction. It's going to be a lot of fun, so stay tuned for the entire video. Before we start breaking down their stats and their departures, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also ring that bell to get notified whenever new Tracy Take content comes out. Ryan and I, we put out videos Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We're in the middle of our offseason recap series, so you want to check out and see how the other NFC North teams did this offseason or the rest of the NFL. Be sure to ring that bell to get notified. And Ryan, let's pull this up here. So we have the stats up for the 2023 Detroit Lions team, offense and defense as well. We got this from Pro Football Reference. And just right off the bat, starting off the offensive team rankings, one of the best offenses in last year's season. It felt like a little bit of a dip, I think, in like that middle of the season, where it just felt like they were just a little bit off. They were dealing with some injuries. But at the start of the season and at the end of the season, I mean, it was one of the best Lions teams that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I think maybe actually a lot of people probably say that as well.
I was gonna say that's probably one of the best Lions teams ever.
Potentially, maybe not ever. There might be some going back in the 50s or whatnot, but you get the point, though.
True.
And so they were a lot of fun to watch. I think everybody was rooting for. If they weren't playing your team that day, I think everybody was rooting for the Lions. Except for the Packers fans, maybe something like that. I think as well. They kind of moving the defensive team statistics. I think some of these numbers are maybe a little inflated just because of how good the offense was, like the passing. They definitely had some faults in the secondary, but I don't think their secondary was as bad as I think 27th in the NFL. I think it's because they had a lot of high-scoring games and gave up a lot of passing yards just because of that. That being said, though, I did like what they did in the offseason with their secondary and the players that they got. We'll get to that here in a second. But I want to throw it over to you, Ryan, when it comes to this Lions team. Like entering this offseason, what do you think were some of the main areas that they needed to address, kind of looking at their 2023 season?
Yeah, so actually I do disagree a little bit. I think they needed to address the secondary in a sense of they just needed to get younger. They had some older guys that were on the team that like CJ was there, but he struggled a lot with injuries. Cameron Sutton, I believe, also struggled a decent bit with injuries. So I think they just wanted to get younger. And I will say even some of the younger guys, Brian Branch, to be specific, struggled with injuries in and out of the year in his rookie season, even though he looked promising as a whole. So I really liked what they did this offseason. And then going back to the offensive side of the ball, they were top 5 in most categories. The only thing was turnovers, and they were still above average in turnovers. Or sorry, is 19th a good or bad? Like, are we going most turnovers is 1?
Slightly below average.
Slightly below average.
Okay, number 1 would be 0 turnovers. Yeah.
Okay. And so that might need to be improved a little bit. However, when you're putting up as many points, I think as we saw that they did, you can afford to have a few mistakes the few mistakes that they made. So
that's
all in all.
And that's kind of proved my point that a little bit, where I felt like there was a little bit of a dip in the offense, just a little bit, even though they did end up winning some of these games. But like from week 8 to week 14, they had 4 games with a bye week in it. So 4 or 5 games where they had 3 turnovers or more. And a lot of those were Jared Goff.
Yeah.
Like they 3 turnovers against the Raiders in week 8, 4 against Chicago in week 11. Ironically, they won both of those games. But then 3 against the Packers. This was Thanksgiving week. They ended up losing as well. Then a couple weeks later, they had 3 against Chicago again, and they lost that game. So there was that little stretch there where it felt like their offense had taken a dip. They were still able to win some of those games, but that was kind of where I think that really inflated those turnover numbers, just that little stretch there. Now that isn't, I guess, well, it's just 5 games, but it's still that's where at the beginning and the end of the season, I think they really finished out strong.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and especially think you look at their playoff performances, getting to the NFC Championship. This was a really high performing offense. So let's move on now to their departures. A few names that I already mentioned: CJ and then Cameron Sutton both moved on from the team as well. Jonah Jackson, the left guard, did. Benito Jones, Will Harris, Julian Aquara, Matt Nelson, and Josh Reynolds. Besides Cameron Sutton and CJ were brought in to be like true contributing pieces. Jonah Jackson is a loss
Mm-hmm.
that I think that they could replace, but
Well, they
for
did.
me,
Yeah.
not well. Yeah, they did, but not a whole lot of like true star production. They re-signed Amon-Ra St. Brown to an extension. Like they re-signed Jared Goff to an extension. So I think a lot of the key pieces were brought back, and then they kind of let some of the guys go that were more replaceable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's a lot of these pieces are to your point, and we'll even get to the who they replaced Cameron Sutton and CJ Gardner Johnson with here in a
Yeah,
second. But yeah, a lot of those guys are replaceable as well. Even to some of their free agents as well. Like they could still re-sign these guys if they wanted to later on in the season, or later on in the offseason, like come training camp, if they just needed some more depth. Like a couple of guys like Charles Harris or Romeo Arquara if they want some more edge rusher depth as well. I think the only name potentially that I think that they could resign, but maybe not, would be Holly Vitae, their right guard. He ended up getting hurt and missed on the
yeah,
season, and so maybe they'll bring him back. But as we get to here in the acquisitions and just also guys who replaced him as well, I think that they probably wouldn't want to risk paying him the money, and I would get that as well. But not too many names here on this list that are like, oof, that's going to be a big loss,
yeah,
especially kind of with the directions they're going for. And I think that'd be good if we want to go to the acquisition page now.
yeah,
And so they ended up trading for Carlton Davis, just using up one of their third round picks. They had two third round picks, and then they also then got Meek Robertson as well. I'll get to the draft picks here in a second. We'll definitely touch back on the secondary. But then Kevin Zeitler, I think, coming in immediately going to be one of the starters coming over from Baltimore. I think Marcus Davenport didn't have that great of a year in Minnesota, but still, he's Marcus Davenport going to be able to provide just some good pressure opposite, or just some good relief minutes, I would say, now at this point in his career, across from, shoot.
Aiden Hutchinson.
Aiden Hutchinson. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. It maybe not even relief minutes, but because as of right now, we'll get to in a second, he potentially could be the starter and still go across with him, which is going to be huge. I think DJ Reader is also going to be a good addition as well. He did have an injury to end the season, if I remember correctly.
yeah, he did not finish the season with the Bengals.
That's what I thought. I can remember if it was him or their other defense tackle. But just have to see how he bounces back. But all these guys provided serious minutes for their team last year, so I think like they got at starters or at minimum good rotational pieces as well, depending on like the level that Mark
Yeah,
Davenport has. But Ryan, I
yeah.
know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, looking at the fruits, they definitely went with quality over quantity,
Yeah.
and so I like the moves that they made, and then I think to kind of get into the draft class, so they got Carlton Davis in a trade as well, and then their first two picks went out. Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw were their first two picks, so they got three new DBs in that room, and I do think that this offense kind of needed it because you think Brian Branch is more that safety type, whereas Terrion Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw, and Carlton Davis can all find roles on the outside, playing in the slot, or potentially even one of them moving out to safety. But again, I think they identified the position that they needed to address the most, and they went out and they hopefully one of these guys will solve it. So
Well, I would say, I mean, they definitely, their strategy with the draft was secondary, their first three picks. And I was mistaken. They traded their pick to Tampa Bay, so then that made Tampa Bay have two third round picks.
yeah,
And so I was mistaken on that. I think actually they did have a 73rd pick. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But their first three picks, the way the draft ended up, their first three picks ended up being secondary pieces.
yeah,
And so definitely clear. And that's something we're going to touch on here in a second when it comes to the depth chart. But clear, primary focus. And to be fair, too, if they really improve that defensive line, and we've talked about this a lot on the channel, is if you have a solid defensive line, all you really need is just a mediocre secondary, just because if they're able to provide a lot of good pressure. And that was kind of one of the things I think if there was an area of improvement for the Lions was just their overall pass rush. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson had 11.5 sacks.
yeah.
Lee McNeil had 5. But if I were to go, and I'm curious actually now so on their pressure rating, They so they did provide the most pressures for the league actually, but then when it comes to sacks, as we mentioned earlier, they only had where were they at here? They were in the bottom half of just in overall total sacks. And so getting, I think, some more help with Aiden Hutchinson, who had a lot of those pressures, I think. So you get the pressures, but then if there's, if you're not able to finish them, I think adding some more guys like DJ Reader, Marcus Davenport is going to help out a lot in that closing down on the sacks for the team.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that was definitely something I think that we noticed at the end of the season was that if it wasn't Aiden Hutchinson, they probably weren't getting a sack there.
Yeah.
So definitely, it is nice to hit on a draft pick like that because he is developing into one of the top defensive ends in the league. But I think getting DJ Reader, Marcus Davenport should help out a little bit, and then maybe some other guys can develop and step up and. Maybe they'll be even more aggressive and bring some more pressure and bring more blitz packages to the table. So let's move on to the offensive depth chart here, and really not a whole lot of change. The big addition is going to be Kevin Zeitler that we kind of already talked about to this offensive line slotting in at right guard, but everything else pretty much looks the same as last year. You got a few new backups, Giovanni Manu, the left tackle. And then I believe that he's actually from the CFL, and then Christian Mahogany, the guard from Boston College. So again, I think all these guys are like this offense is pretty well set. You look, Jameson Williams started to come on at the end of last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown just got a big extension. Excuse me. But I think this offense is pretty set in stone. I think we should be seeing a very similar product to what we saw last year.
Yeah, and their biggest thing, and I think it'll be the biggest story of the training camp is just going to be how this offensive line gets pieced together. I mean, you did move on from Jonah Jackson as well. Sorry, I'm struggling to remember names here on this episode, so I apologize. But did move on from Jonah Jackson
here at the Tracy Take.
I know, yeah. But then getting to Kevin Zeitler, just making sure that all that meshes together, because I think one of the things that this offense really focuses on was that running game. I mean, being the top 5 in rushing yards for the NFL, is if they're able to run the ball effectively with David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs coming into his second season, so he's going to be even more developed as well, and potentially can start to see him getting more lead back roles towards the later half of the season. I wouldn't be surprised by that. But if they're able to develop that running game, still have like one of the dominant offensive lines in the league, it's only going to open things up in the passing game. And with how effective Amon-Ra St. Brown is, I think it's going to be I think could see another top 5 offensive performance this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's going to be really interesting. I am very interested to see what new ways they can incorporate Jahmyr Gibbs into this offense, because Ben Johnson did a great job of just kind of scheming him up and getting him some design touches in this offense too. So they have 2 playmaking running backs that are going to be very deadly and very heavily utilized.
And I think that's one thing as well that I don't think I can emphasize enough is how important it is for this team. Of everybody that has left or has come back, I think the fact that Ben Johnson stayed as the offensive coordinator, I think is going to be huge for this offense going into the 2024 season. Because a lot of times when we see these offenses, Falcons, perfect example, when you see an offense under a great offensive coordinator, but then he leaves and goes to take the head coaching job, a new offensive coordinator comes in. It's a potentially totally different philosophy, totally different lingo, potentially even just different communication style and how you might relay the play on play calling in certain situations here. So the fact that they've already had a season or two, I'm unsure on how long Ben Johnson's been there, but at least a season under his belt and seeing the success that they've had already, I think they're only going to keep improving, and that communication status is still going to be there. Compared to if he had moved on and it's a new guy, and it might take a second for the offense to gel and to kind of get used to the lingo and everything going on when it comes to calling down the plays and the play calling in certain situations. I think that honestly could be one of the biggest acquisitions, or just re-signings, is the fact that Ben Johnson stayed on this offense.
Yeah. Oh, no, for sure. And I don't know if I love his reasoning behind it. I don't know if you heard that. he said he doesn't want to go to a bad team and that he thinks he has the ability to pick and choose, which technically he does. But the ego behind that, I think, is
Ah,
very.
I respect it.
I do, but if you get the opportunity to make tens of millions of dollars to be a head coach of a football team, I think you have to take it, even if the team might be bad. And if you're such a great coach, then you should be able to coach them up. And he is a great coach, and I'm not trying to bash him. I just think it's funny that
yeah, but I also think
there's a story of him yelling at his kids' play about how everybody needs to watch his kid. Like, I don't know. There's just funny stories like that. And I kind of find it entertaining because I don't have to deal with it. But
yeah, I don't know. He can call a heck of a football game. So I think if you're in Detroit, that's all you really care about. And so
yeah,
I think the
exactly.
entire city of Detroit will watch his kids play if he brings them a Super Bowl. So I think that everybody will focus on that. But I don't know that story at all.
Very fair.
I just try and focus on what they do on the field and within the organization. And so, but I also think too, to defend them a little bit, if you're at this level, there has to be, I think, a level of arrogance. Arrogance might not be the right. No, arrogance is the right word. Like arrogance and confidence that you have within yourself on your abilities. Which, and you know what, I can respect that. You know, if you think you're the best, and then you want to go up against the best, I like that. And so, well, to see. I mean, he's going to make a good head coach.
I 100% agree.
Yeah, he's going to make a good head coach one of these days. And so, but I think now, kind of moving on to the defense, I think this is where, and Ryan, I really want to get your take, but definitely a kind of reworked defensive line as well. Adding Mark Davenport, DJ Reed, as we talked about. Still some other good pieces, though, that were there from last year, as well, such as John Kaminsky, Levi Onwuzurike, and then Josh
Enrique.
Yes, and then Josh Pascal. The area I'm going to be very curious about is going to be how the secondary shapes up. I mean, with Carlton Davis and Terry Arnold as well, slated as two new starters. Then they did still get Amik Robertson, and then also Enos Rakestraw they have currently as the third string. So I'm curious on how that's all going to shake up as well. But I think there's going to be a lot of competition on who the starters are going to be, and it's going to be fascinating to see just how this shakes up. And that to me is going to be the whole storyline for this team, because if this defensive line improves and they can get some more pressure, help out a little bit more also in the run defense as well, and the secondary become more locked down, yeah, it's going to be tough for these teams to try and win in a shootout against this Detroit Lions offense.
Yeah, and that to me, I think Enos Rakestraw, Kendall Vildor, Brandon Joseph, those guys are probably not going to be on the team, and I think Enos Rakestraw will probably slotted somewhere in that range rather than all the way back there. But this secondary is going to be very interesting in the sense of, like, there is so much young talent. It reminds me a little bit of like the Packers wide receiver room, because Brian Branch is a second-year guy, but then Terry Arnold, Enos Rakestraw are very young. Kirby Joseph is going to be in his third year. So, like, very, very young group of guys, but all highly drafted, all very talented. It's just how well is it all going to come together? And I think I think they will. These are Terry Arnold and Enos Rakestraw were both guys that we liked coming out of the draft. So I think I think it's a good recipe for success. I do think it's going to take them time to develop, though. So maybe I could see some shootouts early on in the season, but I think as this defense gets better and better, then we'll see some more low scoring games, I think, from the defensive Lions. Or some better defensive performances, because if the offense is still kicking, it'll just be a blowout.
Well, so, especially too, with how they're built. I mean, you want Aiden Hutchinson to just pin his ears back, and with just statistically, I think that'll help them out if they get some more in those passing situations, and then if maybe more beefed up, more veteran experience on the defensive line. Hopefully, they can increase that sack numbers as well, helping out the secondary and their passing numbers. And so it's going to be interesting to see. I think that secondary of everything, I think that secondary is going to be interesting, most interesting in training camp to see how it develops. But I think kind of moving on now to their schedule here. Being the NFC North champions, they're going to have a little bit of a tougher schedule going up against the other division winners who they're not already scheduled to play. But starting out, Matt Stafford coming back home, or at home, I should say, but back to Detroit to play week 1 of Sunday Night Football. That'll be a lot of fun. That was a great game to watch. It will be a great test for this newly built secondary going up against Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and company as well. I think there's going to be kind of definitely some revenge that the Rams are looking for here to try and win. And then Tampa Bay as well. I don't see why there wouldn't be another reason why they don't beat Tampa Bay the same way that they beat Tampa Bay in the playoffs last year. So I think that'll be interesting. And then a couple of fun games at Arizona, hosting Seattle Monday Night Football, then get a bye, and then at Dallas. I think that's going to be an interesting stretch there because all those teams I think are fringe playoff team. Arizona's I think for sure on the outside looking in, but I think there's some potential there that we'll get to here when we do our Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, to recap, that'll be fun to talk about. But Seattle and Dallas, I think, are fringe playoff teams. I'm curious to see how the Lions handle them because on paper, I think they should kick the sign out of them personally.
Yeah, that's like this first 6 games, I think, is a good litmus test for this team. Like, I'm gonna favor them in most of these games. I like Dallas in week 6, especially coming off the bye. They should have beat them last year. I think there's going to be a lot of hard feelings going into that game, especially it's back at Dallas. So
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a fun one to watch. But really, the biggest thing with this schedule that I don't like is that Detroit was given a week 5 bye. It's very rare that and not that the NFL favors teams, it might just be the luck of the draw. But having a week 5 bye when you're going to be a late playoff contender is that sucks. And so now then they have to go the next 12 weeks without a bye. And they do have some, I don't say mini buys because the one mini bye that they should have had is actually, well, I guess they have a mini bye the next week against Buffalo. So they have one mini bye after the Green Bay game. But that's my biggest complaint with this schedule is just that early bye. And they do have an easier start to the next 8 games with at Minnesota and then Tennessee, but you have to go at Green Bay, at Houston, Jacksonville, at Indy, and then Chicago on a short week, and then a week later Green Bay on Thursday Night Football. So all in all, not too bad. They kind of clumped together, I think, like the hard games for them. You have Green Bay and Houston, then Chicago and Green Bay again at the very end. But I think like they're a good enough team. They should come out of this stretch above 500.
Oh yeah, no, I think they're going to be above 500 starting from after week 1. But during this stretch, it is going to be tough. Like at Green Bay, at Houston is going to be great litmus test, I think, for their Super Bowl capabilities because I think both those 2 teams could play in the Super Bowl this year, in my opinion. Jacksonville's a playoff team. Indianapolis, I think, is a fringe playoff team. Chicago's going to have a lot of hype around them, so that's going to be a fun Thanksgiving Day game. Green Bay as well, another division game. So they have 4 division games in their last 6 games, and their other 2 games are against, but also potential Super Bowl contenders. Buffalo, we'll have to see, maybe dip a little bit, but that Week 17 matchup at San Francisco on Monday Night Football, that's going to be a lot of fun. And you want to talk about revenge, like payback games, like Detroit going back there after losing to them in the NFC Championship. They're really going to go and show what's up. Because that also, too, at that point, that could determine home field advantage if both of these teams are going to win their division.
Well, and I think if you look at what the Lions did this offseason, they've totally revamped that secondary, brought in 3 new corners, like specifically, and what really cost them the game, what was the turning of the tides in the San Francisco game was the Kindle Vildor dropped interception. That kind of was that fluky big play that got San Francisco a touchdown on the board, and it kind of was like the beginning of the swing of the momentum for San Francisco. So I think that was a big part of going into this offseason was, all right, well, this secondary clearly can't cut it. Let's redo it. And they get a chance to get things right this time on Monday Night Football. So, and that last stretch, they do get to end with Minnesota, Buffalo, at Chicago, at San Francisco. That's probably their toughest 3-game stretch because I think you look even like Tennessee, Green Bay, Houston, or either Jacksonville right after that, and then Indiana, Chicago, Green Bay. I think isn't quite as tough. So, getting to end with Minnesota, I think should be good. And I think that might be, if how I feel the season's going to go for the Lions, that might be early bye week anyways.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it'll be, I mean, because they're going to have a tough 5-game stretch there starting with Chicago week 13, ending with week 17 at San Francisco. Minnesota, we're projecting not going to be that great, so to say. And so I think if they can manage those those 5 games, and especially too, if they can take care of Chicago, which I think they should be able to, but I also think too that's going to be kind of a tough matchup for them, just with the way I think Chicago is going to be playing. So in general, for winning the division, going to the NFC Championship game, not the toughest schedule in my opinion. Is when you're going up against the AFC South. A lot of question marks with Tennessee still, just on how good they can be. Jacksonville, see if they can be healthy, and Indianapolis, has good potential. Let's see how good Anthony Richardson. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that I would have them favored in all those games. Houston's going to be a tough one, especially then two on the road. So in general, I think it's not the toughest schedule it could be for the Lions to come back after they won the division. So it's going to be fun to watch. And I mean, I'll be rooting for the Lions again. I just love that story. I love rooting for Dan Campbell. He's one of my favorite coaches just to go and watch, and I just love his passion for it and the way the players react to him. So I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I will say, kind of going into this record prediction here, I have them going 11-6, and it's nothing really against the Lions. Like, I think they improved. I will say, and you're not going to like this, but I think the Packers, I think that they've just shown they're a little bit better. I think in the playoffs, if Packers would have won that Niners game, I think they would have beat the Lions at home or at Detroit in the NFC Championship game, just the way they're playing. I think they're all really young. I think they only got better. I think this defense even got better. Offense is only going to get better as well. I think they're just slightly better now. I think they've passed the Lions. I don't think the Lions really regressed at all. I don't think they regressed. I think they've also improved too, especially to seeing how that secondary meshed together. I will be more open to changing this record if like Kieran Arnold, Enos Rakestraw, Carlton Davis are just absolute monsters on the field, and they can really potentially slow down that Green Bay Packers, because that's, I think, actually really why they went and focused on that secondary, because they know they're going to be going up against, like, they're looking at these teams now. Like, they're looking at the teams in the division. You got Justin Jefferson on the Vikings. You're going to have DJ Moore, Rome Odunze in Chicago. You're going to have that offensive system, Green Bay. Like, you're going to have good corners. So I think, how do these Lions corners react? I think it is going to maybe take them. They're going to have really good moments, but I think before they get really solid, like Legion of Boom solid, it might take a year or two for them to kind of get back to that status.
Yeah. And one thing I think that's helping them do that is the fact they don't have any division matchups until week 9 against Green Bay. And then actually, yeah, is that correct? Am I reading that right? Oh no, week 7 against Minnesota. But even then, that's still, they should handily beat Minnesota. And so I like how their schedule's laid out for them, except for that bye week. I think they're going to win the division again. I still look at it, and I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is the second best receiver in the division. Besides Justin Jefferson, I think he's the best receiver in the division. This offensive system, I love the way that they play, because this is a spread. Like, they spread it out and they air the ball out, but they pound the rock between the tackles, and they out physical teams. And to me, one of the things about the Thanksgiving game last year with the Lions was, one, they were kind of coming back from that downswing that they had in the middle of the year. But then also, that Packers team, they hadn't really played anybody. They had a few good offensive performances, but that was like their breakout game was that week 13. And so for me, I think they kind of caught the Lions a little off guard. I think if they had met in the playoffs, the Lions probably would have been more ready. And so I'm still kind of riding this Lions hype train a little bit, just in the sense of this team, they have another year with Ben Johnson. He came back. That offensive system isn't going to change. That offense didn't really change except for one single guard. And so this defense only got better. I'm a little concerned about the pass rush, because you had Aiden Hutchinson, and then really not much else. But they went out, they got Marcus Davenport, who's been okay throughout his career. So they got better in their areas of weaknesses. It's going to take some time before I think they can really make impacts. But when they do, I think that this is going to be a really, really deadly and effective team.
Yeah, it's deadly. They're gonna murder people.
Yeah. No,
No,
yeah.
no, but it's I like it a lot. I mean, I'd love to see it. I think his uh, it's tough to say. I guess his historically, but typically, I think it is tough for some teams to go back to back division champs because your schedule is on paper just a little bit tougher because you're playing the division opponents, the division
Mhm.
that you weren't already scheduled to play. So there's going to be a little bit tougher challenges there. Uh, but it's going to be interesting here to see just how much improved that secondary has gotten. Is my theory correct about Ben Johnson saying there's the offensive coordinator and that offense can stay status quo, if not improve a little bit? So, and I agree with everything that you said. I love the way that they play. I really like that balanced approach to the game of running the ball really effectively. Then it opens things up for the passing game. The Lions is going to be a fun team to watch. Like I'm rooting for them. If they're not, as long as they're not playing the Falcons, I'm rooting for them. Just because I just really love the way that they go and play.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. With the Packers, I want to see them do it before I jump on. And to me, the Lions have already done it. They should still be improving. This is still a young team for the most part,
Yeah,
and so I like what they bring to the table. But all in all, this division is slowly becoming one of the most competitive in football. I think you look, the Lions are set up to be perennial contenders. The Packers are the same way. The Bears, I think, are looking really, really solid. If you haven't seen that offseason breakdown, go look at that. And then the Vikings, I mean, I don't think they're going to be good this year, but if they continue to improve and JJ McCarthy is the quarterback, sorry, is the quarterback of the future there, I think that's going to be a really tough division to continually win in. The one of the things that's, I think, helping them out is I do think the NFC is a little bit weaker as a whole. Uh, Not as much as it was like the last season or two, but uh, like this division is going to be close for a very long time.
I I, I can agree with that. 'Cause I do think that it's definitely better than what it was last year, especially like the Bears improving significantly is another
Yeah,
team already in the playoff hunt. But the Lions, I think, are one of the few teams that I think they're a playoff lock. Knock on wood. I think they're a playoff
yeah,
lock just with how they play. I think they're better. I think they're still better than the Bears for sure. Even though I think they might lose to them, just because I think maybe because of matchup reasons wise. But I go and immediately just thinking of some of the other teams. I think they're going to be better than all the teams in the NFC East. NFC West, I think that it's going to be interesting on how they do against the Rams and the 49ers. But other than that, I think that they should be better than the Cardinals and the Seahawks. Should be better than almost all the teams in the NFC South, even my Falcons. Even I think it'll be interesting. But not saying that
yeah,
they can't lose to any of those teams. I said that they're better than, but they're probably going to be favorites in most of those games. So I think
yeah.
that they're going to be a playoff lock and probably be the 5 seed or maybe the 6 seed at worst when it comes to the playoff if they don't win the division.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially if they get to 11-6, they're going to be the 5 seed, I think. So,
Yeah.
let's go ahead and wrap up this one here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Detroit Lions 2024 offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? And on that, we will see you guys next.